Hello everyone, my name is Michael Mumo. I'm the lead heritage ranger with Cane River National Heritage Area, and on behalf of myself, my gracious family, and Cane River National Heritage Area, I'd like to welcome you to my kitchen. Sorry for the mess as it is, but in this time of COVID-19 stay-at-home orders, we're trying to take a little bit of our historic presentations to the home front, to your home front. So this presentation is kind of our inaugural of what I like to call Sips of History. And for this documentary run, we're looking at the Roaring Twenties and Prohibition in Natchitoches and Natchitoches Parish. So this first episode, we're looking a little bit at how the beginnings of Prohibition came. Did it happen overnight? Did it happen over decades? And it's actually the latter of that. It's over decades. Prohibition had its early roots in the United States starting around the 1830s, 1840s. Most notably with the rise of more cheaply produced and accessible hard liquors or distilled spirits. The colonial experience, the early statehood experience of the United States had always been a drinking community. British visitors coming over to the United States in the early 1820s and 30s would say that Americans drink with everything. They drink when they're sad, they drink when they were happy, they drink when the harvest comes in, they drink to console themselves when the harvest does not come in. And the traditional refrain might often been said when people came into groups would be, would you like a drink or fight? So the legacy of drinking to one extent or another in the United States was pretty common with the early experience of America. But by the 1840s, you start seeing the big temperance movements coming through. We're not going to have time to kind of dig into the deep of that topic, but some of the big time dates and groups of that era that will push for temperance is going to be largely led by women and the Protestant church. One of the biggest groups of the early period coming out of the post-Civil War period would of course be the Prohibition Party, established in 1869. And the largest female organization, which would have been the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which led the call for prohibition starting in the 1870s. And then you have the larger umbrella organizations like the Anti-Saloon League pushing in the late 1890s to push states and eventually the federal government to limit the sale and dispensing of alcohol. Many believe that and pretty well to the point, that alcohol, the ease of access of alcohol led to the breaking of families, increased instances of violence, and it really impacted the poor population because what money they needed to subsist their family often went to alcoholic drink. So you do see a push across the nation in different states and regions more fervently than others. Kind of bringing it home to the Louisiana experience, you have kind of a divided populace here in the state. In the northern reaches of the state, along what's now the I-20 corridor, along the Black Belt parishes along the Mississippi River, along the Sabine River, where there was a large Protestant population, you did have a desire, or at least a willingness, to put forward the ideals of prohibition. Where in the heart of the state and along the Gulf Coast, where you had your large Roman Catholic, Episcopal, German, Lutheran populations, as well as some of your big economic commercial centers, most notably New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and then the oddity being Shreveport on the Red River, that were really hesitant to stop the sale and production of alcohol because, for multiple reasons. One, it was their culture and backgrounds to have drink for celebrations or in the home. And then kind of commercially, for the big cities, that was where the money was made in commerce and trade and entertainment. So you do have this sharp divide in Louisiana between the dries, the prohibitionists, and the wets, those who did not want the cessation of prohibition, or the starting of prohibition. And ultimately, kind of, you have this kind of hem-hawing back and forth between these two groups. Initially, ironically, about the same time that the women's rights vote movement comes through, you do see a larger upswell of support for prohibition, leading to what eventually is known as the Volstead Act, or what we now know as the 18th Amendment. Louisiana, though on the fence, will be the 14th state to ratify that act. on August 9th, 1918. And by January of 1918, enough states have ratified it, and thus the Volstead Act becomes the 18th Amendment of the Constitution. And Prohibition would start at the beginning of 1920, making all production and sale of alcohol illegal. You may have noticed that I did not say consumption of alcohol. That will be the little tipping point of how to get through with various private parties and things of that nature, which we'll talk about in later episodes. But kind of bringing it into the home front of Natchitoches, you see an evolution and surprising decay of saloons in Natchitoches between 1892 and 1930, looking solely at sand-borne fire insurance maps that outline what different buildings operated as. We see in 1892 that there was 5 saloons, 1 restaurant, 1 druggist, and 2 grocers. All of these had the ability to sell alcohol in either drink form, or in the case of grocery and druggist, groceries could sell it by the bottle. Alcohol used to be a medical remedy for many issues, so they could dispense medical alcohol from drugstores. 7 years later, by 1899, that had decreased to 1 saloon, 1 restaurant at the Live Lake Hotel, which was located on St. Denis and 2nd Street, as well as 3 drugstores and 4 grocers. So you see a kind of an upswing on the druggist and grocery store numbers, and looking solely at kind of 1st Street and 2nd Street between Washington and Jefferson Streets. There, by 1909, there are no saloons in downtown Natchitoches. They've all closed and shuttered, but you do have a rise of now 2 restaurants, both of which were in hotels. You have 3 drugstores, and in 1909 you also have that interesting rise of the soda fountains, or the soft drinks. Coca-Cola coming out in the early 1900s, that had become popular in Natchitoches as well. You see a sudden boom of soft drink institutions, and mostly on Front Street near St. Denis. And then by 1914, most of those soft drink places have gone out of business. Only 1 remains with a partnering pool hall next door. So you may question that they're still selling alcohol with their soft drink offerings as well. You have 1 restaurant only at the hotel located on Front Street, as well as 5 grocers and 3 drugstores. And now our Sanborn maps are truly in the Prohibition era. 1923 is the next one we see. So, not surprisingly, no saloons whatsoever yet again. There are 3 drugstores, 1 restaurant, and the Hotel Wimp, where, of course, Prohibition would outlaw the selling of wine and spirits at the restaurant at the hotel. The one asterisk or loophole there for druggists was that you could dispense medical alcohol with a doctor's prescription. So that would allow for some passing off of funds illegally to a doctor occasionally to get prescribed alcohol. And then, of course, our last Sanborn map that we look at during the Prohibition period is 1930, which lists 4 restaurants. 3 of these restaurants are standalone. And of course, you have the pop-up of 1 club along Front Street, kind of off near Washington Street. So Sanborn doesn't really go into what this club was, but we'll talk about it in later episodes about how private parties at certain institutions might have had a loophole for alcoholic beverages to be served as well. So ultimately, we have kind of an opening up that we do understand that Prohibition slowly moved. There was apparently a move in Natchitoches as well, that there is at least on the face of Sanborn map, that there is a move against public consumptions of alcohol outright by the notable close of a lot of saloons, but maybe a shift to more home consumption, private consumption, or private party consumption. Of course, that is kind of grasping at a narrow snapshot, because we don't have a lot of personal accounts or narratives to work on at the moment. But at the beginning stage of this delve into the look of Prohibition and the Roaring Twenties in Natchitoches, it's a good point. So ultimately, the idea of these presentations is to bring you a little bit of history of Prohibition, the Roaring Twenties, and Natchitoches, but also to provide you a little bit of historic cocktails so that you can literally sip on history. And with that, we're going to give you a quick little recipe and show you the sample of how it is made. For this edition, we're going to look at a traditional rum punch. Louisiana being a traditionally sugar production state, even colony further back, rum will go to be a mainstay of alcoholic drinks in the state and in the Gulf South region as well. So that connection to the history of the sugar trade here, as well as that role into prohibition in the state, rum punch is a good example of that moving through time. And here we're going to get out the ingredients and show you how that is made. So we're going to show you a little bit about that rum punch now. We've got the ingredients out. Most of these items have been made pre-recorded. What we're going to have for the rum punch recipe is we do have a container of steeped green tea, some simple syrup, as well as some lime juice, and we've already put in our 2 ounces of rum here for this cocktail. Now the original recipe that we're going to provide you and what this is based off of is from the 1780s, and it's more for a party setup, so it is for a true punch bowl serving style. The original recipe called for a full bottle of Navy Proof or 57% alcohol by volume rum, the juice of 12 limes, a full cup of simple syrup, and 2 cups of green tea. And it was supposed to be preserved in a jar for a few days and then served either room temperature or on ice. But for this time period that we're looking at, during the Prohibition era, definitely by the 1920s when Prohibition hits, but just before that, you probably would have seen rum punch served in a single glass or still in its punch bowl form. So today we've got it into a single glass. We've got 2 ounces of rum already poured. With that, since this is kind of on the fly measures, we are going to add just a little bit of lime juice. Add maybe a tablespoon of lime juice to your cocktail. You're going to add probably about 2 ounces of simple syrup. And then you are pretty much going to top off the glass with your green tea. So this is probably a very simple cocktail setup. Throw in a couple of ice cubes if you have. The original recipe did suggest serving it at room temperature, but in quotes, if you dared. So here we're going to take a little bit safer approach and add a couple of ice cubes. So with this simple recipe for this cocktail, it's going to provide you a taste of not only the early 1910s and into the early Prohibition era in the South, but also well into that colonial period experience of not only Louisiana colonial experience, but all of the United States colonial experience. So we hope that you enjoyed this presentation and enjoy the cocktail and enjoy your sip of history.